K. Lawson Younger Jr., he says, while there are differences, the Hebrew conquest account of Canaan in Joshua 9-12 is by and large typical of any ancient Near Eastern account. So Joshua sounds like an ancient Near Eastern war conquest. Well, if we go and read some of those, we find something interesting. The Gebel Barkol stele of Tutmosis III says this: the great army of Mitanni, it is overthrown in the twinkling of an eye. It has perished completely. Say that again. It has perished completely, as though they never existed, like the ashes of a fire. Tutmosis III fought the Mitanni Empire. They did not perish completely. His son Amenhotep II made a treaty with them. So they're obviously still around and have a standing army. This is ancient Near Eastern hyperbole. We see this in the Merneptah stele. It says, Israel is laid waste, his seed is no more. Huru is become a widow because of Egypt. Again, ancient Near Eastern hyperbole. It's saying these were completely wiped out. They weren't. It's just saying they're defeated with strong language. The Mesha inscription mentions Israel. It says, Israel has utterly perished forever. That obviously was false. This is just ancient Near Eastern war hyperbole. Sennacherib says, the soldiers of herem, dangerous enemies, I cut down with a sword and not one escaped. So we see this throughout. And Nicholas Wortersdorf says in Divine Evil, it says, we can call it a hagiographic account of Joshua's exploits. The book is not to be read as claiming that Joshua conquered the entire promised land, nor is it to be read as claiming that Joshua exterminated with the edge of the sword the entire population of all the cities on the command of Yahweh to do so. So scholars had realized the hyperbolic nature of the account of Joshua. If they had compared it with other ancient Near Eastern accounts of complete conquest, the image of the conquest as represented in Joshua would have emerged in a far clearer focus than it is. So what is it basically saying? It's basically saying they came in and they utterly defeated their enemies. They wiped them out. It was like no one was left, even though there were. And we see this in Joshua 10:20. It says, when Joshua and the sons of Israel finished striking them with a great blow until they were wiped out, comma. Then it says, and when the remnant that remained of them had entered into the fortified cities. Wait a minute, I thought the first part of the verse said they were wiped out, and now you're talking about a remnant.
Okay.
Comma's not there in the Hebrew, but yeah, okay.
It's not. Now we have to get into some of this and why it's problematic. So Michael's argument is that we have these other analog texts from the ancient Near East where they use hyperbolic language to exaggerate the extent of the destruction that they've committed upon their enemies. I've got a few things to say. If these texts, the texts in Joshua, if they are merely employing warfare rhetoric, does this exempt the possibility that they can also be descriptions of genocide and wanton destruction of non-combatants? One doesn't necessarily preclude the other. I think that's important to note. Are the conquest stories the same types of texts as these examples of warfare rhetoric? Now, everything that Michael has been citing are royal inscriptions. In all of these examples, there's no question of the employment of hyperbole and its intention. But are these texts equitable comparative works to the conquest narratives themselves? Royal inscriptions are, in the first place, intended for the gods. Kings erect these and they write on them as a form of devotion to their own deity. They're not even necessarily intended to be read, certainly not read widely. It's not the point. You're dealing with something quite different when you're looking at the narrative account in the book of Joshua. Both are forms of propaganda, but different kinds of propaganda. What's fairly unique in the book of Joshua is the specification of how far this slaughter is to go. By and large, what you find in Joshua is the description of killing everyone, yes, but then it's qualified. Men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, supposed to wipe out everything, combatant and civilian alike. There's a specific term that appears within the narratives of the book of Joshua. It's not exclusive to the book of Joshua, but it is used there more frequently than anywhere else in the Hebrew Bible. And this is the Hebrew verb herem, from which we get the nominal form herem. This verb is used, usually described as to devote to destruction. The noun is usually described as, translated as the ban. It's a specific term that is applied to the action that the Israelites are to take specifically with the people in Canaan as a means of satisfying God's instructions with regards to their eradication. But at the heart of it, this term is a cultic term. When we look into how to translate words, if we want to understand what these words mean, the way to go is to consult your lexicons. The harder but much more effective way to go is to just look at how these words are used in context, evaluate these words broadly and in all sorts of different texts from all sorts of different cognate languages. And this is how lexicography is done. So this term is used to mean separate very broadly. It's used to denote things that are sacred, belonging to the gods. When it appears in the hiphil stem in Hebrew, this is the verbal conjugation, which is how it appears universally throughout the book of Joshua. It means to, and this is citing the standard work on the Hebrew language, the Hebrew Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament. I appeal to it a lot. Means to put under the ban, to devote to destruction, especially war booty. It's used of cities with all that is in them, all the inhabitants, all the cattle. It's meant to destroy. It is used occasionally to dedicate something to Yahweh by the ban and therefore rule out its redemption. So whenever this term is used in this form, basically what it means is that you are setting aside whatever is committed to the ban, whatever is devoted to destruction is set aside as belonging specifically to Yahweh. Within a wartime context, I like to describe it like this. Kings could convince their subjects to go to war for them on the promise that if you go and fight my battles, you can go and collect spoils from the people that you defeat. You can take their cows, you can take their valuables, you can take things out of their houses, you can take them for your slave labor. This is the benefit of going to war for me as your king. Please don't clip that. So, the way a herem works in this instance is Yahweh is saying to the people of Israel, you're going to go to war for me, but you don't get any plunder because it all belongs to me. And because it all belongs to me, what you're going to do to it is you're going to destroy it. You're going to destroy it all. And because it's an offering to Yahweh, there are no half measures. It's everything. It's an indiscriminate slaughter of anything that lives and moves and breathes because it all belongs to Yahweh and he wants it all. This is what the word means. This is the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament, Volume 5. The verb is only used in the causative stems, that's the hiphil and the holful, and designates a special act of consecration. It involves consecration of something, of someone as permanent and a definitive offering for the sanctuary, or in war, the consecration of a city. Also denotes the total annihilation of a population in war. He goes on to say, the utter destruction of a city or a country in respect to foreign nations appears in texts such as 2 Kings 19:11, 2 Chronicles 20:23, Isaiah 11 and 15, and so on. The emphasis is on the element of an action that is radical and total. The nominative denotes an act of consecration, extermination, and killing. It involves the exclusion of an object from the use of abuse of humanity and its irrevocable surrender to God. Surrendering something to God meant devoting it to the service of God or putting it under utter destruction. He goes on to say this, and I think this is really important. The negative is implied when anyone survives, is delivered, is released, is shown mercy, is saved alive, or even is allowed to make a treaty or to enter into marriage. The taking of booty can also imply the negative. The point I want to reinforce here is that this particular term, the verb herem, the noun herem, which is used to describe The activity taking place within the book of Joshua, it's specific to the point that these are sacred offerings to Yahweh, and what you are to do with them is to destroy them utterly. You're not to keep back anything for yourselves, which is what ordinarily would happen. You certainly don't let anyone get away. You have to kill them all. You have to kill them all because they all belong to Yahweh, and Yahweh demands your total devotion and your total sacrifice. That's the point. There are two important stories in the Old Testament. One appears in Joshua chapter 6 with regards to herem offerings, and the other appears in 1 Samuel chapter 15. In Joshua chapters 6 through 8, this is Joshua's conquest of the city of Jericho specifically, and then the city of Ai directly thereafter. And in this story, Joshua delivers the command from Yahweh that you are to commit everything to the ban. You are to utterly destroy everything. Everything is part of the herem of Yahweh. He goes on to say that you are to kill everything with the sword, man and woman, young and old, sheep and goat. Leave nothing left that breathes alive. The text goes on to say that this is what Joshua did. Joshua and his armies destroyed everything and everyone in the city of Jericho that breathed, and then burned it all. This was the fulfillment of the herem. Now, what happens in this story, a lot of you know this story in the book of Joshua. There's a fellow by the name of Achan, son of Carmi, Achan in English. He, we are told, keeps back some silver and a garment. As a result of this, the text goes on to say that the fury of Yahweh was kindled, because not everything was committed to the ban. Achan managed to save a couple of small items, non-living items, for himself. The Israelites then go and attack Ai, a much smaller city, we're told in the text, than Jericho, and they're routed by the people of Ai, and they're frustrated and they're upset because they've lost, they've had casualties. This wasn't supposed to happen. What is happening? Yahweh explains that they have committed an egregious act, that they've held back from the devoted thing, from the herem, and he says, you need to look after this. If you do not look after the herem prescriptions and fulfill them, fulfill your vow, give to me what you promised you would, then I'm going to make a herem out of you, is what he says. So they go through the process of coming to discover who has held back devoted items from Yahweh, and as a result, Achan and his entire family and his clan are wiped out. They're killed and they're burned. They're covered over with stones. The moral of the story is that you cannot hold back when it comes to the herem. You have to follow through with it in its totality. That is the point. So it doesn't do any good to suggest that we're just using hyperbolic language when we're talking about the slaughter of the Canaanites in this regard, because this is precisely the point. This was a herem offering to Yahweh, which means he required all of it. Everything was committed to destruction. That's what the narrative is telling us. That's where we're at with hyperbole. You can't apply it to these texts. It doesn't work. This is a sacred act. The devotion of everything to Yahweh. It's radical and it's total. It's an expression of extreme fealty to the God that is out of character. And that's what sets the book of Joshua apart from a lot of these other inscriptions where other rulers are describing in hyperbolic terms the destruction of their enemies. Even though these are hyperbolic, can we be certain that there was an immense slaughter? Does this preclude the death of non-combatants? So I'll say this, when it comes to the book of Joshua, this did not happen. The book of Joshua is a fiction. It is a fiction written for the intent of the promotion of this isolationist idea for political purposes. Some of this is simply just a land grab. as well. And all of this, is what's happening in the 8th, 7th, 6th century. So no, none of this happened. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that it did. Let's grant that this is historical, and then let's also grant that this is hyperbolic. Where's the guarantee? Where's the qualifier as we evaluate these texts that even if hyperbolic descriptions of the extent of slaughter, that these preclude the death of innocents, the death of old men, the death of women, and the death of children? There's no provision here or anything like that. You have to invent that out of thin air. And I'm sorry, I'm a scholar. I'm not interested in making shit up just to satisfy my own pet theories.